This unique story begins with showing a researcher named Alan, who is discussing a very large statue. Alongside him is a friend named Scout, with whom he was in love. Alan was explaining that this statue has been present on Earth for thousands of years, but the technology and tools used to create the statue are techniques that humans have not yet developed. So, how did such a large and perfectly crafted statue come to be so many years ago? Alan had been researching this matter for a long time and came to the conclusion that this statue was created by a new civilization that came not from Earth, but from space. In a way, Alan believed that these statues were made by aliens who had very advanced technology. Now, Alan started spending some good time with Scout when suddenly a man from his organization called him, stating that he had discovered a strange structure at a mining site, and this could be the greatest discovery to date. This must include alien technology, which made Alan very excited to find out what it was. Soon, two employees named Richard and Nicole arrive at the other man's location. The man took them to the structure and explained that this is the discovery. In fact, something triangular had emerged from underground, appearing very advanced and unique. The man informed Richard and Nicole about this experiment, mentioning that their team had surveyed the entire structure and the area. They discovered that this structure was emitting different types of vibrations, confirming that it was none other than an alien spaceship. However, they would still have to wait to fully understand it. Richard and Nicole were very impressed by this exploration, and they realized it could be the most unique and significant discovery to date. At this point, at Richard's insistence, Nicole killed the man because Richard didn't want an ordinary person to take credit for these findings. Now, Richard was the one who would take all the credit for this discovery. Richard and Nicole gathered all the information about the structure to report to Alan. Scout then goes to Alan, telling him that they have discovered a structure filled with many unsolved mysteries. Richard has now invited Alan and Scout to investigate it. Although Alan was aware that one of his friends had first called him about this structure, he had no idea that his friend had died. Both Alan and Scout had gone with Richard and Nicole to the mining area where the strange triangular structure was located. Scout noticed that the white structure had strange symbols on it. As she approached the structure and placed her hand on one of the symbols, she suddenly had a strange vision where she saw herself standing near the structure, but now there were two identical copies of her wearing spacesuits. Scout couldn't understand where these visions were coming from. At that moment, Alan came over and brought her back to her senses, causing Scout's vision to end there. After conducting all their research, Alan and Scout went to sleep, but Scout was having strange dreams in which a woman with curly hair stood near the triangular structure and suddenly disappeared. After seeing all this, Scout's eyes opened wide, and she started to understand a little. She told Alan that she believed this triangular structure was not made by aliens, but rather by ancient humans. Investigating it was not as easy as it seemed. They needed to focus on more details. Now, Scout and Alan faced Richard along with the other employees. Scout explained that they needed to decode all the markings and symbols on the white structure, as they contained a message that would help them learn more about it. However, Richard clearly stated that they would not be allowed to do this, and that there was no need for both of them to continue with these tasks. In fact, Richard had removed Alan and Scout from the project altogether. Richard did not want Alan and Scout to work on this project at all. He had even spoken to the management team and received permission, which meant that Alan and Scout had to be removed from the project. The situation was simple. Richard wanted to take full credit for the discovery of the white structure for himself. Now, Scout and Alan approached a friend, where Scout insisted that they needed to decode those symbols at any cost. Alan, however, said that they didn't have permission for anything and had been removed from the project. Scout did not agree. She felt that all these things could become dangerous for humanity. They needed to gather all the evidence and properly advance their plan. Scout and Alan went behind the curtain to have some fun when suddenly there was a knock at the door. As Alan's friend went to open it, there stood Nicole, Richard's assistant, who quickly killed Alan's friend. Now she was searching for Scout and Alan everywhere. Nicole saw that the two were fooling around just behind the curtain, so she began to strike the curtain with her gun repeatedly. The curtain fell completely down, but fortunately, Alan and Scout managed to escape unharmed and hid behind the curtain. After seeing all this, Nicole thought she had killed Alan and Scout, but they were both completely safe. Richard had forced Nicole to do all this because he did not want any evidence against him that could claim they had seen the white structure before. After finishing her job, Nicole left, but now Alan and Scout knew they had to first save their lives and destroy Richard's plan. Richard had used all his power and money to build a large laboratory around the triangular structure, where various scientists were continuously conducting experiments on it. Richard needed to find out everything about the structure as soon as possible. Just then, a scientist came to Richard in shock, informing him that their team had researched the structure and vibrations were still coming from inside it. Richard was completely shocked when he heard the scientist's words. The white structure, which he thought was a small object, was actually a small part of a very large and advanced spaceship. This meant that the spaceship was still buried underground and was functioning perfectly. Hearing this, Richard became extremely happy and ordered his men to begin the process of extracting the spaceship. However, the scientist warned Richard that there were continuous vibrations coming from inside the spaceship, which could mean that if they brought it out, it might take off on its own. Ignoring all these warnings, Richard continued with his plans, determined to extract the spaceship and take credit for its discovery. Meanwhile, Alan and Scout were sitting a little distance away, filming the strange structure to gather evidence. However, Richard soon realized that Scout and Alan were keeping an eye on him. Therefore, he sent several military helicopters to attack them. Scout managed to evade the attack, but Alan was shot and killed instantly. Seeing this, Scout burst into tears, unable to believe her eyes that Alan was now dead. But in the very next moment, Scout found herself waking up in bed, with Alan beside her. She thought it must be a dream, but if it were a dream, then Alan should truly be alive. Pressure began to build in Scout's mind. She couldn't understand whether Alan's death was a dream or reality. If it were a dream, Alan should be alive, but he was dead. The next moment, Alan was awake in bed. How could he be in two places at the same time? It was incredibly difficult for Scout to make sense of all this. To clear her mind, Scout decided to go to a cafe where she kept searching for information about Alan. Just then, a waitress, seeing Alan troubled, approached him and asked if he was okay and if he needed anything. To clear her doubts, Scout started asking the waitress about Alan. But suddenly, Scout received a call from a blocked number. She couldn't understand how someone could call her from a blocked number. Despite her confusion, she didn't answer the call. Shortly after, Nicole, who had come to kill Scout, entered the same cafe. When Nicole approached Scout's table, she realized that Scout wasn't there. Scout had hidden her mobile phone in an ice cream cup and left because Nicole was tracking her through that phone. Scout had just figured this out. Now, Scout went directly to Richard, threatening to kill him, as she needed to know what was happening to her. However, Richard's soldiers and Nicole arrived and captured Scout again. Richard had drawn his gun to kill Scout, but one of his engineers suggested that they should keep Scout alive, as she could be very helpful for their mission. So, at Richard's command, Scout was taken captive and brought to the laboratory built around the large spaceship. All the scientists and engineers noticed that the activity inside the spaceship had increased with Scout's arrival. Therefore, Richard decided to take Scout closer to the spaceship. Scout couldn't understand what these people were planning to do with her. Just then, Richard told Scout to step onto the spaceship. As soon as Scout placed her hand on the spaceship, the vibrations intensified, as if the spaceship was about to launch. Due to the increased activity, Richard suddenly sank into the ground. At that moment, a chamber of the spaceship opened, and a red-colored ranger emerged from it. It appeared to be a very advanced robot. Nicole immediately aimed her gun at the robot, but when the robot saw her, it shot a laser beam from its eyes, killing Nicole instantly. The red robot then seized Scout. The spaceship began to leave the area, creating earthquakes as it rose from the ground. It then ascended rapidly into the depths of the sky. After a while, when Scout opened her eyes, she found herself inside the spaceship. Richard was also trapped with her, and they were moving deeper into the spaceship. Soon, the spaceship traveled directly and landed on the moon. After a short while, the red robot approached Scout and Richard, pulling out a spacesuit. The robot gestured for Scout to wear the spacesuit. Scout understood that the red robot wanted to take her outside, so she started putting on the suit. Meanwhile, Richard was completely terrified and placed his hand on Scout's shoulder to talk to her. However, Scout had developed a strong hatred for Richard and told him to stay away. Seeing this behavior, the robot assumed that Richard was trying to harm Scout, so it grabbed him with its sharp hands and began to threaten his life. But after a moment, Scout told the robot to let him go. The robot released Richard, who was in shock, wondering why Scout had saved him. Scout then said, "You killed Alan, so later I will kill you with my own hands." The red robot then began to take Scout out of the spaceship, leaving Richard inside. This was the first time Scout was stepping onto the lunar surface, and she could see her Earth in the far distance. The robot was taking Scout to a different location, while Richard, still inside the spaceship, approached the controls and attempted to fly the spaceship. He thought he could quickly take the spaceship back to Earth by himself, leaving both of them stranded there. Ultimately, Richard managed to take off the spaceship. However, Richard couldn't fly the spaceship properly, and after traveling a short distance, it crashed onto the moon, completely destroying it. Unfortunately, Richard also died in the explosion. Meanwhile, Scout and the red robot continued their journey. Suddenly, a large blue robot emerged from the ground. For some reason, this blue robot was trying to attack Scout, but the red robot bravely fought back, protecting Scout. Both robots were incredibly strong, but the red robot possessed unique abilities that allowed it to match the blue robot in combat. Despite suffering many injuries, the red robot eventually defeated the blue robot and instructed Scout to move further away. However, the red robot was in such bad shape that it could no longer continue its journey. It called Scout over and handed her a strange structure from its body. The red robot gestured towards a large statue that was built on the lunar surface. Scout approached the statue with a small structure. To her surprise, this was the very statue that Alan and Scout had been researching at the beginning of their story. One statue was on Earth, and the other was on the moon. Scout noticed that there was a small hole in the head of the large statue, which was the perfect position to insert the small structure. Without thinking twice, Scout placed the small structure inside the large statue's head. After doing this, the statue activated for some unknown reason, and a large platform began to rise from below. Scout was very scared, but this was just the beginning of a series of shocking events. A brilliant light erupted from inside the statue, covering the entire moon in an instant. The usual lack of gravity on the moon created a strange atmosphere. After a while, when Scout opened her eyes, she looked around and thought she had returned to Earth, as the place looked exactly like it. She took off her helmet to check. Then she could breathe properly, but the real reality struck when Scout looked into space and saw that another Earth already existed. The simple truth was that Scout was not on Earth, but still on the moon, which had now become habitable for humans, likely due to the large statue that had somehow created an Earth-like environment across the moon. Scout moved a bit further and saw a chamber with an option for fingerprint recognition. She placed her hand on it, and the door opened. When Scout entered the large chamber, she saw an unknown man trapped in blue laser lights. Scout had no idea who he was, and it appeared that he had been asleep in the blue laser beam for many years. As Scout approached him, the curly-haired woman she had seen in her dreams appeared behind her. The woman was touching Scout's hair, and Scout could feel it. But when she turned around, no one was there, which clearly indicated that the woman was not present in reality. Rather, her energy was conveying her presence to Scout. Thousands of years ago, when worlds were being formed, many worlds had been destroyed by shooting stars. Therefore, a deity named Jaren decided that Earth must be saved at any cost because no other life existed in this universe apart from Earth. It was crucial to save Earth. Although I had taken a spaceship to Earth, for some reason I could not return. With no other options, Maya chose Scout to complete the mission, which is why Scout had been experiencing visions from Maya. Later, Scout learns that the deity Maya was speaking of, Jaren, was none other than the same man. Scout, who was inside the laser beam, tried to approach Jaren and speak to him, hoping he would say something so that all humans could thank him. However, Jaren, who was in hypersleep, did not respond. Suddenly, the blue robot that had attacked Scout before appeared from behind and began attacking her again. The red robot had saved Scout last time, but this time she was completely alone and didn't know how to escape the blue robot. Then, out of nowhere, Scout felt strange powers awakening inside her body. With great courage, she faced the blue robot, trapping it inside the door and killing it. Later, Scout noticed that her entire outfit and appearance had changed, indicating that Maya's energy had entered her, and now she had to carry the entire mission forward. Scout positioned herself right beside Jaren and stood inside the red laser, entering hypersleep to maintain balance with the deity. She wrote on the walls that this is a new world. Do not ruin it like Earth. This message was for the humans who had come to the moon because, thanks to Scout, the entire moon had become habitable for humans, allowing them to bring more than half of Earth's population to live here. Finally, we see the first plant sprouting on the moon's surface, marking the beginning of a new species development. And thus, our adventurous story comes to an end here.